All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Classical Greece Part 3, the sort of end of Greece. Well, once the Greeks finished fighting the Persians, for a good period of time, there was this golden age of Greece. It was largely 180 years of just amazing, awesome, wonderful times to be Greek. They were the cultural and educational center of the world. Definitely the most educated culture on the planet until 1500 AD. The Greeks, man, they invented some really cool stuff, and I think I'll get into that in a later slide. But they knew everything about the human body. They knew a bunch of stuff about astronomy, and this was a great example of how when a country was sort of open to democratic ideas and allowed for freedom of thought, humans could really expand and grow in a lot of ways. And in fact, there was even a Greek guy who invented the steam engine during this time period, but the Greeks sort of like forgot about it and they didn't do anything with it. And I mean, wow, like imagine if the Greeks actually developed and utilized the steam engine in 400 BC. We'd probably have, Jesus in space. It would be a very different world. But this golden age of Greece was ended by the Peloponnesian War, which I talked about last time. The Peloponnesian War was basically a nuclear bomb that wiped out the vast majority of Greek learning and Greek ideas, and Greece is never going to be a big deal after it. All right, so let's keep going. Ba-boom. Oh yeah, well, so here's some more details about during that period. Some of these Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Hopefully, you've learned about these people before, but they were all these guys who came up with some incredible ideas of how to live a good life and how to be a good person. Yeah, and I mentioned all this on the other slide. So, wow, they invented the water pump and the idea of cells. Man, microbiology, 400 BC. Yeah, the Greeks were pretty awesome. All right, so yeah, here's the School of Athens, and there's Plato and Aristotle kicking it right there. Okay, so this is another really important historical event. So after the Peloponnesian Wars, the Greeks are just sort of beaten and divided and confused. And this guy named Alexander, well, what was his full name? Well, the history knows him as Alexander the Great. He's from this country of Macedon, just north of Greece. And the Macedonians know that the Greeks are really smart, and the Greeks know how to fight, and they know how to spread their culture and ideas. And Alexander loved the Greeks so much that when he took his army in and invaded each Greek city-state one at a time, he then spoke Greek, he followed Greek culture, he totally became sort of a part of the Greek identity, but he was a Macedonian. Oh, and I got to bring up this story. So Alexander the Great, there's so many stories about this guy, and a story that I love is a story about his horse Bucephalus. Bucephalus was supposedly the best horse in the history of the world. I think there was an account of Bucephalus bit an enemy dude's head off in a battle. Holy cow, an amazing horse. And Alexander, he was just generally loved by the guys who followed him. Every time he took over one of these Greek cities, he just said, like, hey, join up with me, I'll make y'all rich. And there's so many great quotes by this guy. I am not afraid of an army of lions led by a sheep. I am afraid of an army of sheep led by a lion. Some deep stuff in there. All right, so there's a fresco of Alexander being a boss. And there's the quote. And then, boom, Alexander going around. So once Alexander takes over all the Greek city-states, he unites them together and says, we're going to go on a warpath and just conquer the whole ancient world. And he does. This guy set a record for global empire that doesn't get beat until, like, Napoleon. Well, no, until the Mongols, but then Napoleon. So he's up there in the top 10 world conquerors in history, and he lived 2,500 years ago. So, yeah, he conquers the known world, and everywhere he goes to, the people learn Greek. They spread some of these Greek ideas around. Well, they didn't spread the steam engine, but they spread other stuff. And this concept of Greek culture spreading everywhere is called Hellenism. And, like, it's pretty cool. Like, people, like archaeologists, have gone to Iraq, they've gone to India, and they found some ancient Greek stuff. And they're like, oh, Alexander the Great brought this over here when he kind of took over the world. So that's all super duper cool that he kind of united the world. And you're like, well, Mr. Brown, isn't he a bad guy because he was doing it through violence? Well, for the most part, he just had people surrender and join his super country. I mean, there were some pretty epic battles, though. Let's be real. And here's some other interesting stories about Alexander the Great's adventures. There's this knot of ropes that were like tied together in this weird, wacky way. It was supposedly this epic knot the size of like a bus. And when Alexander the Great headed into this city, they said, if anybody can undo this knot, we will have them be our king. So Alexander looks at this epic and tied up bunch of ropes for a while, and he says, and he takes out his sword and he cuts all the ropes. So he sort of untied the knot, but he did it in a clever way. And another thing that's kind of cool is everywhere Alexander went, he named cities after himself and his horse. And if you travel around this part of the world today, you'll find cities named Alexandria or Alexandros, or I think there's a city in Pakistan that's sort of like Bucephalus. So yeah, he also said, like, you can be king of your country, but I'll be the king of you. I am the king of kings. So that's an interesting idea for how to take over the world too. You let other people keep their old roles. You just have them report to you. And the last story here is focusing on this picture. Let's see if I'll zoom in on it. Yeah, right here. So this guy right here is Diogenes. He's a famous philosopher. And Diogenes' whole idea is he just wanted to sort of enjoy the sun and the sky and just kind of be a chill, relaxed dude. Well, Alexander the Great famously found Diogenes kicking it under a tree, or kicking it near a tree. He walks up to him and says, Diogenes, like, how can I live a better life? And Diogenes sort of ignores Alexander the Great, and he says, you can live a better life by getting out of my shade, because Alexander was, I guess, blocking the shade of the tree. And Alexander's men were shocked. They were like, what? How can this guy, insult the king of kings like that? But Alexander the Great, he sort of laughed about it, and he said, like, wow, this guy is so humble, and here I am, the most powerful man in the world, and Diogenes couldn't care less about me. So Alexander famously said, if I could not be myself, I would be Diogenes, because he's just so content with nothing. And that's interesting too. And yeah, here's Alexander untying the Gorgon knot with his sword. Boom. So yeah, during Alexander's empire, he not only spread Greek culture everywhere, but he took ideas from India, from the Middle East, from Africa, and this sort of great cultural union was pretty cool. It made new foods, new ideas, new religions spread all over the ancient world. And the biggest city he founded, after himself, the city of Alexandria, it's still in Egypt today. And he made that city the center of world learning. I mean, Alexandria is kind of on the tip of Africa, so it's pretty close to Europe and the Middle East. There in the city of Alexandria, he founded a library. At one point in history, this library will have 2 million books in it. Or really, they weren't books, they were like scrolls, but still. And one of those scrolls said how to make a steam engine. I also know that there was a whole section in there called like Greek plays. And this famous Greek poet Sophocles, he supposedly wrote like 67 plays, but in the history of the world, we only have but in the modern world, we only have like 5 of those plays. So all 67 of them were in that library, and we'll talk about what happens to that library later in history. But yeah, Alexander, he also founded the majority of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Of course, the statue of Zeus, the Colossus of Rhodes. So there was a lot of really amazing stuff that happened in the world at this time. And if only it could have lasted, we'd live in a better world today, that's for sure. All right, so those are the wonders of the ancient world. And then there's the Library of Alexandria. And here's Alexander just meeting up with people, having them join the game. But this period of history was so short. I mean, Alexander kind of started this this journey when he was 19, and he continuously traveled across the world, united the world, but he died when he was 32. I mean, shoot, I'm 32. Like, what have I done in my life that's anywhere near as cool as this guy? So yes, when he dies, his empire just falls apart. He doesn't have he had a son, but his son gets killed really quickly. So the whole world just collapses, and all these various factions break apart and fight each other. But there still were some legacies of Alexander's time, which is interesting to note. Yep, so there's Alexander. What did he die from? That's a big historical dispute. Some people say he was wounded on a battlefield, and the wound got infected and he died. Some people say he got malaria, and that's probably the most likely case. So if only they had vaccines and medicine, he could have cured the disease and lived on. All right, and then these are all the countries that got formed when his empire fell. All right, and that's it for ancient Greece. See y'all next time.